that we understand Daniel chapter 2 properly. Here we have Dr. Anthony George, and Dr. Anthony George is a dispensational futurist. He's going to promulgate the dispensational futurist false eschatological scheme. And I have a paper here called The Five Main False Teachings of the Dispensational Futurist Eschatological System. One, the belief in a pre-tribulation rapture that is a temporally separate event than the second advent, so they're not the same event. I argue against this. They are, in fact, the same event. Number two, they argue for a 7-year period of great tribulation, taken from a fallacious interpretation of Daniel 9:24 through 27, where they insert a gap of time from the end of the 69th week to the beginning of the 70th week. There's about a 2,000-year time gap in between there. And we're going to see they insert a gap of time also in Daniel chapter 2's prophecy, the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2. Futurism, a single solitary individual called Antichrist will rise to power only during this mythical 7-year period of tribulation, which is still future from our time. 4, that the modern nation state that calls itself Israel, and just because a nation calls itself Israel does not mean it is Israel. That is the Israel of God. The Israel of God is in fact the church. The church has nothing to do with some modern nation state in the Middle East. And then 5, that Christ will return at the end of the 7-year period of tribulation, destroy the wicked, and set up a kingdom on earth for 1,000 years. This is also false. They are premillennialist. I myself am a premillennialist, but the millennial reign of Christ and his saints will take place actually in heaven, not on the earth. The earth will be desolate, void of all life. So when Christ returns at his second advent and all the reaping angels destroy all the wicked who are living at the time, then Christ will resurrect his dead saints, the saints who have died in Christ, and he will glorify his living saints, and we will all be caught up together to meet the Lord in the air, to go to heaven, Jesus' Father's house, where he has been preparing a place for his people ever since his ascension into heaven in Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. So these are the 5 main false teachings of the dispensational futurist eschatological system. But here we're going to focus primarily on Daniel chapter 2. So Daniel chapter 2, of course, we know the basic outline of this metal man prophecy in Daniel chapter 2. We have the head of gold symbolizing the Babylonian Empire, followed by the chest and arms of silver representing the Medo-Persian Empire. We have the belly and thighs of bronze representing the Grecian Empire. And here we have the 2 legs of iron symbolizing the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire, which came to an end in 476 AD. But notice how the 2 legs of iron go directly into the feet and toes of iron and clay. Dr. George is going to say that the legs of iron, while representing the ancient Roman Empire, the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay represents a revived Roman Empire, future from our time, even future. It's from our time. It hasn't happened yet. Okay. In other words, he inserts a huge time gap between 476 AD, the end of the 2 legs of iron, the Roman Empire, and the beginning of the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. So, see, dispensational futurists cannot get away from inserting arbitrary time gaps wherever they see fit to make their system work. And this is where their system falls apart. But let's listen to what Dr. George has to say here about that revived Roman Empire and the feet and toes of iron and clay representing a revived Roman Empire. This is utterly false. This is false. There is no such thing. But let's listen to what he has to say anyway.
But here's the thing. We determined, and Bible scholars who interpret this from this perspective believe...
From this perspective, the dispensational futurist perspective,
that the legs on that image represent the ancient Roman Empire, but the feet and toes represent a revival of the Roman Empire in the last days. So the legs and the feet represent a Roman Empire, but it is a Roman Empire of 2 different periods of history. Looking back on it now, the ancient Roman Empire has come and gone. But if we're inferring from Daniel's prophecy accurately, and I
And you're not inferring from Daniel's prophecy accurately at all. The two legs of iron went directly into the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. You cannot insert your arbitrary time gap in there. And that's what you're doing. You're inserting a time gap where there is no justification for it at all whatsoever.
believe we are,
No, you're not.
the feet and toes that were not of solid iron, but of iron and clay
Right?
put together as this composite type substance. And then those feet and toes were fashioned from this hybrid of clay and iron. That's the revived Roman Empire of the last days. And what this means is, I believe that in the same way that the ancient Roman Empire was centered in Europe, the revived Roman Empire of the last days will also be centered in Europe. And there's some significance to Nebuchadnezzar's vision of this warrior image with the 10 toes. You know, everybody's got 10 toes. Well, this image, this warrior had 10 toes as well. And we have reason to believe that those 10 toes symbolize some type of 10 nation confederation that will emerge from Europe. From Europe.
Right. And still in the future, even from our time, maybe it's beginning now or whatever. No, no. The feet and toes. So in Daniel chapter 7, we have the 10 horns. Okay, Daniel chapter 7, we have the same time prophecy, but instead of a metal man image, we are given the symbols of beasts that rise up out of the sea, which is, of course, very important once we get to Revelation chapter 13, because in Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10, we have a beast that rises up out of the sea, which is not indicative of a single solitary individual human being like dispensational futurists want to say it is. Okay, a beast represents an empire, a nation. And of course, we know what that sea beast represents. It represents the papal Roman Church, the papal Rome. Okay, just like the two legs of iron go directly into the feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. Notice, if it goes directly into, and there's no time gap here, as Dr. George would assert there is, that's false. There is no time gap there. Then that means that since 476 AD, there has always been a remnant of the ancient Roman Empire in the world. Okay, in the world, all the way up until the stone that strikes it, the image on its feet and toes of iron mixed with clay, representing the second advent of Christ. Okay, there will always be a remnant of the Roman Empire. Where does that remnant of iron, the ancient Roman Empire, where does that find its place today? And since 476 AD. And for 1260 years during the reign of the Antichrist, which is a Roman Antichrist, it is a Roman papal Antichrist, that remnant of iron finds its place in the papacy. In the papacy. Okay? So again, no gap of time between the two legs of iron and the feet and toes of iron and clay, some mythical revived Roman Empire, a 10-nation conglomeration of Europe. This has dispensational futurists looking at Europe in a very negative light, doesn't it? Right? Where we know in Revelation chapter 13, that we have the sea beast. Revelation 13, this is the Antichrist, continues for 42 months, 1260 literal years. Okay, this is the papacy. The dragon gives his power and his throne and great authority to this Antichrist. Has been doing so for 42 months, 1260 years. And of course, the papacy received a deadly wound in 1798, back that all the way up to 538 AD. From 538 AD to 1798 AD, that is 1260 literal years. The papacy received its deadly wound in the latter part of the 18th century, and it has been healing ever since. And then we have the rise, right around the time the Antichrist receives a deadly wound, we have the rise of the earth beast, the beast that rises up out of the earth. Again, a beast is symbolic of a world dominating empire. A world dominating empire. The beast rising up out of the earth, two horns like a lamb, rose up out of the earth. That is a sparsely populated area of the world, versus the sea, which has to do with a densely populated or densely populated areas. The Babylonian Empire, beast that rose up out of the sea, densely populated area. The Medo-Persian Empire, densely populated area. Grecian Empire, densely populated. The Roman Empire, densely populated area. This one rises up out of the earth, a sparsely populated area, at around the time the Antichrist receives its deadly wound in the latter part of the 18th century. Having two horns like a lamb, so it was Christ-like. Christ-like. That's what lamb has reference here too. In all of the references to lamb in the book of Revelation, it has to do with Jesus Christ, except for this one. Except for this one. Okay? This is why that this earth beast is also known as the false prophet. It is not a single solitary individual human being. It is an empire, a world dominating empire, and it spoke like a dragon. See, this puts all our eyes should be on the United States, because this earth beast is the United States. This sea beast is the Antichrist and is papal Rome. But your dispensational futurists cannot see that, because they have all kinds of false presuppositions that we have to unwind in order to begin a proper study of God's prophetic word. Dr. Anthony George is not doing it. Dispensational futurists are not doing it. High partial preterists like Jeff Durbin, Gary DeMar, Kenneth L. Gentry, Douglas Wilson, these partial preterists slash post-millennialists, they're not doing it. They take the exact opposite error of the futurists. Okay? That's why the Reformation writers who actually wrote on Bible prophecy were neither preterists nor were they futurists. They were historicists, like me. And that's why if you look at the Westminster Confession of Faith, the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith, in their chapters on the church, you will see that they identify the Antichrist, the man of sin, son of perdition, from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. They knew full well the proper identity of the Antichrist. Dr. George does not. Thinks it's a future single solitary individual from some conglomeration of a revived Roman Empire in Europe. Okay? And the preterists think it was like Caesar Nero way back in the 1st century AD. Both false systems. Let me know what you think about all that down below. Talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.